A UN report released in July of this year predicts us reaching 9.7 billion people in 2050 and 11 billion by the end of the century.
More people in the world means more people here in the UK, and it's already happening. Figures released in June of 2015 put the population increase at nearly 500,000, bringing us close to 65 million.
So over the last decade, the UK population has been growing by around 0.7% per annum.
Our population is kind of similar to France's population, but of course France is twice as big.
We're almost growing as fast as the rest of Europe put together. It's that sort of difference.
So, why are we growing? One reason is birth rate. We have a reasonably high birth rate compared to other big European countries, about 12.8 per thousand people compared to France's 12.6 and Germany's 8.7. This is still nothing though compared to countries like Niger with 49.8 or Mali with 47.4.
The myth of overpopulation originated in England in 1798, when a vicar named Thomas Malthus, who fancied himself something of a mathematician, saw that food production increased incrementally, but people reproduced exponentially. He sat down and did some simple math, and summarily decided that the world would be out of food by 1890. He blamed reduced mortality rates, and recommended killing off the have-nots of society, lest the haves starve to death. This cry was taken up by Paul Ehrlich of Stanford University in 1968, who claimed that reckless human reproduction had overwhelmed the Earth. Massive famines would result, which would destroy, best case scenario, 1/5 of humanity by the end of the 70s. And the planet would follow. This fear produced large donations for the newly created UNFPA, which thrives on an imagined crisis that has been both imminent and rescheduled again and again over the past 2 centuries. The truth of the matter is that every family on this planet could have a house with a yard and all live together on a landmass the size of Texas.
Exporter of people, meaning that for quite some time more people were leaving this country than actually coming in. Over the last 20 years though, that's changed. Of the nearly 500,000 increase in population last year, it's estimated 259,000 of that was due to net migration.
I don't think we should look at all migrants under the same lens. So those people in Calais are a different set of migrants to the migrants that have been coming into the UK over the last 100 years.
From the time of the cavemen all the way until today, humanity continues to exist because each generation of people has produced another generation to replace itself. Scientists have figured out how many people need to be born each generation to replace the generation before. That number is 1 person per person. All things being equal, this creates perfect demographic balance. Since women are the only ones who can have children, replacing every person on Earth means each woman needs to have 2 children, one to replace her, and the other to replace the man, who cannot have children. The total fertility rate is the average number of children each woman in a society is having. This number shows us if a society is growing or shrinking. In developed countries, the replacement rate birth rate is 2.1 children per woman. This will keep the population stable, but even that is assuming that every woman has children, and that there are no wars, famines, or disease. In the real world, disasters happen all the time, and sadly not all children reach adulthood, especially in poor countries. This pushes their replacement rate up to 3.3 children per woman. Since not every woman wants to have children, in order to keep the population stable, some women need to have more than 2.1 children, to balance the birth rate with the women who are only having 1, or no children at all. Maintaining this balance is of the utmost importance. If society does not at least replace itself every generation, human numbers begin to fall exponentially. Economic and social problems appear, as elderly people retiring begin to outnumber young people entering the workplace. This is already happening all over the developed world.
The population of the world could fit into one city. Take a place like London, for example. Imagine 10 humans can fit into a square meter, which is possible, just very cozy. With London being over 1.5 billion square meters in size, that means you could fit about 15 billion people in London alone, using those numbers. They just wouldn't really be able to do anything or have any space. Now obviously that's a bit ridiculous and would never actually happen, but it does show how big this planet is. It seems though that the question of land isn't really the problem, neither necessarily is food or water. It's more how we consume and use these things that will eventually seal our fate. So, is population something we should be worried about?
With every population increase, most countries will also experience an economic increase. So in fact, we are all better off by having more people. We've also been able to advance technology in farming and in medicine and in transport that has led to associated economic increases and making sure that people live longer.
I think my question to those people that think population growth is okay is saying, well, indefinitely? Forever? Is there nowhere where we stop?
Most experts think the world's population will stop growing at the end of this century and will level out somewhere between 10 billion and 11 billion. It's just that we're alive right now, right in the middle of this revolution.
According to believers in overpopulation, there are so many of us on the planet that food production cannot possibly keep up. However, according to both the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization and the World Food Program, there is currently enough food on the planet for everyone to be well fed. Not only that, but we're growing this food on less land than we did in the past. This is why in the United States, for example, the government can afford to pay farmers not to grow food, but instead return their farmland to the wild. Modern technology also allows us to grow food on land where it would have been impossible to do so, even a few years ago. Agricultural experts even believe that Africa, if cultivated using modern farming methods, could eventually feed the whole world, all by itself. Then why are people in many parts of the world starving? The World Food Program lists key causes of hunger, and overpopulation is not on that list. When human beings first showed up on this planet, there weren't very many of us, and we faced a hard life of meeting our basic needs. Chances are, early humans spent a good deal of time hungry, cold, and without shelter. That is to say, poor. According to the World Bank, poverty is when people are deprived of well-being as a result of low income and aren't able to get the basic goods that they need for survival with dignity. How did any of the human race advance beyond poverty? We kept multiplying and we formed communities. In communities, people stop spending all their time on simple survival and are able to do things like divide up tasks, share resources, and pool their mental energies to come up with creative solutions to problems. These communities started with families, then grew into extended families, entire tribes, and then finally cities and nations. So what effect has this growth had on poverty? According to demographers, a very good one. In fact, history shows that as our numbers have grown, so has our average standard of living. Scientists measure this standard in everything from per capita income to average amount of calories consumed, even average height. And all of these averages have been increasing. Even though poverty still exists, the percentage of poor people has actually decreased as population has grown. The reason for this is that human beings are not simply consumers, we are producers. This is why, over the ages, we have learned how to do things like produce more food on less land, find better energy sources, and make sure that more people have enough to eat and a roof over their heads. And this is also why, though urban poverty is still a huge problem, statistics show that the poor who move to large communities actually have better chances of rising from poverty than they did in areas where there were fewer jobs and less opportunity. For this reason, poverty is a problem that is not solved by eliminating people. Poverty has always been a problem, even when there were scarcely any people on the entire planet. People are the only proven way out of poverty. Removing them will only leave the poor right where they started. Think about it.